The neutral zone's only diplomatic station resembled a cosmic truck stop more than a place where civilizations negotiated their continued existence. Floating in the dead space between three hostile sectors, Station Harmony served as the galaxy's most ironically named establishment. Its corridors reeked of recycled air, desperation, and the particular brand of institutional coffee that could dissolve hull plating. In Conference Room 7, the most depressing meeting space in known space, two beings sat across from each other at a metal table that had seen better decades. The room's fluorescent lighting cast sickly shadows that made everyone look either dying or already dead, which was probably intentional given the nature of most negotiations conducted here. Zephyr Kaine, the human diplomatic attaché, studied the alien across from her with the practiced patience of someone who had spent years explaining terrible news to people who didn't want to hear it. Her briefcase sat close beside her chair, its contents representing the kind of information that ended civilizations and started nightmares. Across the table, Delegate Koren Metallic of the Centaurian Republic fidgeted with his ceremonial rank insignia, the small metallic pins catching the harsh light as his three-fingered hands betrayed his nervousness. His blue-gray skin had taken on an unhealthy pallor, and his large black eyes kept darting between Zephyr's face and her briefcase like a condemned man watching both the executioner and the axe. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Koren began, his voice carrying the harmonic undertones that made Centaurian speech sound like distant music. "As you know, we have been unable to establish contact with our homeworld for the past 6 months." Zephyr nodded slowly, her expression carefully neutral. She had perfected this particular look during her 15 years in diplomatic service. It conveyed sympathy without promising anything, understanding without revealing knowledge, and most importantly, it gave absolutely no indication of whether the news she carried would be good or catastrophically awful. "Communication blackouts happen," she replied carefully. "Solar storms, equipment failures, political upheavals. The galaxy is a big place with lots of ways for messages to get lost." Koren's head tendrils, which served as both sensory organs and emotional indicators for his species, curled slightly with anxiety. "Yes, but this is different. Our monitoring stations detect no energy signatures from the Centaurian system. No radio transmissions, no quantum communications, no subspace signals, nothing." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Zephyr knew exactly what had happened to the Centaurian homeworld, down to the minute-by-minute timeline and the precise yield of the weapons involved. The information in her briefcase painted a picture so grim that seasoned intelligence analysts had required counseling after reviewing it. "Perhaps," Koren continued, his harmonic voice growing more strained, "there has been some kind of natural disaster? A solar flare? Or a meteor impact? Your human scientists are excellent at analyzing cosmic phenomena." Zephyr almost smiled at that. Humans were indeed excellent at analyzing cosmic phenomena, particularly the kind they created themselves. The irony was so thick you could mine it for export. "Mr. Metallic," she said gently, "before we continue, I need to ask you something important. Are you here in an official capacity, representing the Centaurian Republic's government in exile? Or are you here as a private citizen seeking information about your family?" The question hit Koren like a physical blow. His tendrils went completely rigid, and his large eyes seemed to grow even larger. Both, I suppose. The Republic's emergency protocols designate me as acting head of state in the event of homeworld communication loss. But I also have 3 offspring and a mate living in the capital city." Zephyr opened her briefcase with deliberate slowness, the metal latches clicking in the sterile air like the countdown to some inevitable conclusion. Inside, folders, data chips, and photographic evidence lay arranged with the kind of meticulous organization that came from documenting atrocities for historical record. "Mr. Metallic," she said, her voice taking on the formal tone reserved for delivering official statements that would be quoted in history books, "I regret to inform you that the Centaurian homeworld of New Centauri Prime suffered a complete planetary sterilization event approximately 5 months and 17 days ago." The words hung in the air like toxic gas. Koren stared at her with the kind of blank incomprehension that the mind produces when it encounters information too large and terrible to process immediately. "Sterilization?" he repeated, his harmonics faltering into discord. "What do you mean by sterilization?" Zephyr pulled out a folder marked with enough classification stamps to wallpaper a small office. The planet's surface was subjected to sustained nuclear bombardment followed by atmospheric combustion. Current radiation levels indicate the world will remain uninhabitable for approximately 15,000 years. Koren's breathing apparatus, located along his neck, began making rapid clicking sounds that indicated extreme distress in his species. But who would do such a thing? The Centaurian Republic had no enemies capable of such destruction. We were a peaceful trading civilization. The bitter laugh that escaped Zephyr's lips surprised even her. Mr. Metallic, in my experience, being peaceful and civilized is often exactly what makes a species a target. She pulled out a series of reconnaissance photographs that showed the Centaurian homeworld in various stages of destruction. The before images depicted a beautiful blue-green planet with sprawling cities and agricultural regions. The after images showed a blackened sphere wrapped in radioactive clouds. The attack was carried out by the Drakari Hegemony, Zephyr continued, her voice maintaining its professional calm despite the horror of what she was describing. They wanted your planet's strategic position and your species' skill at asteroid mining. Unfortunately, they discovered that conquest is much more expensive than extermination. Koren's tendrils had begun curling and uncurling in repetitive patterns, a stress response that his species displayed when approaching psychological breakdown. The Drakari? But they assured us their fleet movements were merely training exercises. They said they wanted to discuss trade agreements. Yes, Zephyr replied dryly. The Drakari are excellent at saying things. They're also excellent at not meaning them. Their concept of trade negotiation apparently involves reducing the other party's bargaining position to radioactive ash. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the seal of the Galactic Intelligence Network. According to our analysis, the Drakari fleet arrived in your system under the pretense of a diplomatic mission. They requested permission to conduct routine fleet exercises in the outer system while trade talks proceeded. The reconnaissance data painted a horrifyingly clear picture. The Drakari had positioned their battle fleet with surgical precision, surrounding New Centauri Prime, while maintaining the fiction of peaceful intentions. When the attack began, it was swift, coordinated, and absolutely devastating. Your planetary defense fleet managed to destroy 17 Drakari ships before being overwhelmed, Zephyr noted, consulting the tactical analysis. That's actually quite impressive considering you were outnumbered 47-1 and caught completely by surprise. Koren made a sound that might have been laughter if it hadn't been so filled with despair. 17 ships? My cousin served on the defense fleet. He always said Centaurian military doctrine was obsolete compared to modern warfare. Your cousin was wrong, Zephyr said firmly. Centaurian ships are some of the finest engineering in the galaxy. The problem wasn't your technology or your tactics. The problem was that you trusted beings who viewed genocide as a cost-effective business strategy. She reached back into her briefcase and withdrew something that made Koren's breathing stop entirely. It was a piece of fabric, burned and torn, but still recognizable as part of the Centaurian Republic's flag. The geometric patterns that represented peace, prosperity, and unity were charred, but visible. One of our deep space reconnaissance drones recovered this from the orbital debris field, Zephyr explained quietly. It was found attached to a piece of your planetary defense headquarters. Koren reached out with trembling fingers to touch the burned fabric. When his skin made contact, his tendrils went completely limp, and a sound emerged from his throat that Zephyr had never heard before but somehow understood completely. It was the sound of an entire world dying in someone's heart. My mate worked at the defense headquarters, he whispered. She was a communications specialist. She always said she wanted to be there when the Centaurian Republic made first contact with new civilizations. His voice cracked. I suppose she was. Zephyr let the silence stretch, giving Koren time to process what he was holding. In her 15 years of diplomatic service, she had delivered news of destroyed colonies, failed evacuations, and political betrayals. But this was the first time she had to tell someone that their entire species had been wiped out for convenience. How many survived? Koren asked eventually, his harmonics barely audible. Zephyr consulted another document, though she already knew the numbers by heart. Current estimates indicate approximately 230,000 Centaurians were off-world when the attack occurred. Most are scattered across various colonies and trading stations throughout the galaxy. Out of a population of 4 billion, Koren said hollowly, we're extinct. No, Zephyr corrected, her voice carrying unexpected steel. You're refugees. There's a difference. She pulled out yet another folder, this one noticeably thicker than the others. The Galactic Council has voted to recognize the Centaurian Republic's government in exile. Your species will be granted protected status and resettlement assistance. Koren looked up from the charred flag, his large eyes reflecting something that might have been hope if it hadn't been so thoroughly mixed with despair. Resettlement? Where? Who would accept 200,000 homeless aliens? Zephyr's expression shifted slightly, and for the first time during the meeting, something that might have been a smile touched the corners of her mouth. Actually, there's been quite a bit of competition for that honor. The confusion in Koren's face was almost comical. Competition? I don't understand. Well, Zephyr said, her tone becoming slightly more animated. It turns out that news of the Drakari attack has spread throughout the galaxy. Most civilizations are absolutely horrified by what happened to your people. She opened the thick folder, revealing dozens of formal documents bearing the seals of various galactic governments. The Andromedans have offered to resettle 50,000 Centaurians in their outer colonies. The Vegan Confederacy wants to establish a memorial world dedicated to Centaurian culture. Even the notoriously xenophobic Rigelians have volunteered to provide technical assistance for establishing new settlements. Koren stared at the documents as if they were written in an alien language, which they technically were, but his translation implants should have made them readable. Why would they do this? Most species barely tolerate refugees, let alone actively seek them out. Zephyr's almost smile became more pronounced. Because nobody likes bullies, Mr. Metallic. And what the Drakari did to your people wasn't warfare or even conquest. It was cosmic-scale bullying, and it's made a lot of civilizations very, very angry. She pulled out a communication transcript marked with the seal of the Andromedan High Council. This is a direct quote from Chancellor Kor of Andromeda. Any species capable of such casual genocide represents an existential threat to all civilized life. The Centaurians' suffering demands justice, and their survival demands our protection. But what can anyone do? Koren asked, his tendrils beginning to uncurl slightly. The Drakari Hegemony has the largest fleet in this sector. They've made it clear that they consider genocide an acceptable business practice. Zephyr reached into her briefcase one final time and withdrew a data chip that seemed to glow with its own internal light. Mr. Metallic, are you familiar with the human concept of proportional response? I've heard the term, Koren replied cautiously. It refers to matching the scale of retaliation to the scale of the original offense. Exactly, Zephyr confirmed, holding up the data chip. The Drakari killed 4 billion innocent civilians to claim one star system. By the standards of proportional response, that represents a rather significant debt that needs to be collected. The implications of her words began to sink into Koren's consciousness, like stones dropping into still water. Are you saying that humanity intends to respond to the Centaurian genocide? Zephyr's smile finally broke through completely, and it carried the warmth of a nuclear reactor just before it goes critical. Mr. Metallic, humanity has a saying. The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. We've decided to do something. Koren stared at the glowing data chip in Zephyr's hand, with the kind of fascination usually reserved for watching approaching natural disasters. His tendrils had stopped their anxious curling and now hung motionless, as if his entire nervous system was holding its breath. What exactly does do something mean in human terminology? He asked, though his harmonic undertones suggested he already suspected the answer would be both terrible and magnificent. Zephyr inserted the data chip into the conference room's display system, and the wall screen flickered to life, showing what appeared to be empty space dotted with distant stars. This is the Drakari home system, Hegemony Prime, recorded 6 days ago by our Deep Space Reconnaissance Network. The image looked peaceful enough. 3 inhabited planets orbited a stable yellow star, their surfaces glowing with the lights of major population centers. Orbital stations and defense platforms surrounded each world like protective jewelry. Transport ships moved between planets in orderly traffic patterns that spoke of a thriving interstellar civilization. Population estimates indicate approximately 12 billion Drakari across all 3 worlds, Zephyr continued, her voice maintaining that same professional calm that made terrible information sound like a weather report. Advanced industrial base, significant military infrastructure, and enough orbital defenses to repel most conventional attacks. Koren's breathing apparatus clicked rapidly. You're not seriously considering attacking the Drakari homeworld? The casualties would be enormous. Humans claim to value civilian life. We do value civilian life, Zephyr agreed, advancing the recording to show massive Drakari warships patrolling the system's outer boundaries, which is why we spent considerable time analyzing Drakari society to determine exactly how many of their civilians actually qualify as innocent. The display shifted to show detailed sociological data compiled from decades of intelligence gathering. Population breakdowns, government structure, military participation rates, and something labeled genocide approval statistics that made Voss's skin turn an even more unhealthy shade of gray. According to our analysis, Zephyr explained, 87% of adult Drakari actively support their government's expansion policies. This includes enthusiastic approval for what they term demographic cleansing operations against quote-unquote inferior species. She highlighted specific data points that showed public celebration of the Centaurian genocide. News broadcasts of Drakari citizens cheering the successful operation. Children's schools incorporating the attack into patriotic education programs. Military recruitment centers experiencing massive increases in volunteers wanting to participate in future extermination campaigns. The remaining 13%, Zephyr continued, consists of political dissidents, conscientious objectors, and what the Drakari government classifies as genetic defectives, scheduled for their own elimination programs. Koren studied the data with growing horror and fascination. You're saying that most Drakari citizens actively celebrate genocide? Not just celebrate, Zephyr corrected. They consider it a patriotic duty. Drakari culture views the existence of other intelligent species as an insult to their racial superiority. They literally believe the galaxy would be better off if everyone else was dead. The recording advanced again, showing massive industrial complexes churning out weapons and warships. The scale of production was staggering, clearly designed to support systematic extermination of multiple species across vast regions of space. Current intelligence indicates the Drakari are planning simultaneous attacks on 17 different civilizations over the next 2 years, Zephyr noted. Projected casualties exceed 40 billion sentient beings. The numbers hung in the air like a death sentence for half the galaxy. Koren made calculations in his head and realized that virtually every peaceful species in this sector was on the target list. So what do humans propose to do about it? He asked, though his tone suggested he was beginning to understand that whatever humans had planned, it would be proportional to the threat in ways that defied conventional military thinking. Zephyr smiled, and this time there was nothing reassuring about the expression. We're going to give the Drakari exactly what they deserve: complete, total, and irrevocable extinction. She advanced the recording to show something that made Koren's tendrils go completely rigid with shock. The peaceful view of the Drakari home system was interrupted by what appeared to be spatial distortions, like reality itself was developing cracks. These are gravitational anomalies recorded by our monitoring stations approximately 18 hours ago, Zephyr explained matter-of-factly. They indicate the deployment of human strategic weapons platforms throughout the Drakari system. The distortions resolved into massive structures that seem to exist partially outside normal space-time. Each platform was larger than most space stations, and they were positioned with mathematical precision around every inhabited world and major installation. What are those things? Koren whispered, his harmonics barely functioning. Stellar engineering platforms, Zephyr replied, as if she were discussing household appliances. Each one contains a small artificial black hole with precisely controlled gravitational effects. When activated simultaneously, they can destabilize a star's nuclear fusion process. The implications hit Koren like a physical blow. "You're going to destroy their sun?" "Oh no," Zephyr said with mock concern. "That would be far too quick and merciful. We're going to do something much more creative." The display showed computer simulations of what would happen when the platforms activated. The Drakari star would undergo controlled gravitational manipulation that forced it to emit massive solar flares while simultaneously cooling its core temperature. "The process will take approximately 6 months," Zephyr explained with the enthusiasm of someone describing a particularly elegant science experiment. "During that time, the star will emit radiation bursts that disable all electronic technology throughout the system while gradually reducing solar output." Koren watched the simulation with growing comprehension and horror. "You're going to freeze them to death in the dark." "Eventually, yes," Zephyr confirmed cheerfully. "But the really elegant part is the psychological component. See, the Drakari will have those 6 months to fully understand what's happening to them. They'll know exactly how long they have left, and they'll know that their own actions caused this fate." The simulation showed Drakari worlds slowly cooling as their star dimmed. Atmospheric temperatures dropping degree by degree. Technology failing as electromagnetic pulses destroyed all electronic systems. Billions of beings facing inevitable death with no hope of escape or rescue. "Of course," Zephyr continued, "we're not completely heartless. We've prepared evacuation ships for the innocent 13% of the population. They'll be relocated to refugee settlements where they can build new lives without the burden of genetic superiority complexes." She pulled up another file showing sleek transport vessels already positioned at the edge of the Drakari system. "Special forces teams will begin extraction operations as soon as the solar modifications commence. Political dissidents, conscientious objectors, and anyone else who can demonstrate they oppose their government's genocidal policies." Koren stared at the screen, trying to process the magnitude of what humans had planned. It wasn't just revenge. It was cosmic justice administered with surgical precision and terrifying efficiency. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. "About 47 minutes after we received the first reports of the Centaurian genocide," Zephyr replied. "Human strategic planning operates on what we call immediate response protocols when dealing with extinction-level threats." She brought up another display showing the broader galactic situation. The Drakari represented a clear and present danger to all intelligent life in this sector. Allowing them to continue existing would have guaranteed the deaths of hundreds of billions of innocent beings. "But 12 billion Drakari civilians," Voss protested weakly. 12 billion genocidal fanatics, Zephyr corrected firmly, "who celebrated the murder of your entire species and were actively planning to murder dozens more. This isn't revenge, Mr. Metallic. This is preventive medicine on a galactic scale." The recording shifted to show human naval forces positioned throughout nearby systems. Not the massive fleets one might expect for such an operation, but small, efficient task groups that radiated competent menace. "The beautiful part," Zephyr continued, "is that this sends a very clear message to any other species with similar ambitions. Genocide carries consequences that transcend normal military retaliation." She activated a communication link, and the screen filled with the image of a human naval officer, whose uniform bore insignia that Voss didn't recognize, but somehow found deeply intimidating. "Captain Torres," Zephyr said formally, "please confirm operational status." The human officer's expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes held the kind of cold determination that made glaciers seem warm and welcoming. "All platforms are in position and ready for activation on your command, Ambassador. Extraction teams report successful contact with resistance groups. We can begin selective evacuation within 6 hours." "Excellent," Zephyr replied. "Please proceed with preliminary operations. Full activation in 12 hours. As the communication ended, Koren realized he was witnessing the final moments before an entire civilization ceased to exist. The casual efficiency with which humans had orchestrated this cosmic execution was simultaneously terrifying and oddly reassuring. "What happens next?" he asked quietly. Zephyr began packing her briefcase with the same methodical precision she had used to unpack it. "Next, you return to your people and tell them that justice has been served. The species that murdered your world will face appropriate consequences for their actions. She paused, holding the charred flag fragment that had started this conversation. You also tell them that humanity remembers its friends and punishes its enemies with equal thoroughness. The Centaurian Republic will be rebuilt, and its people will have a future. Koren accepted the burned fabric with hands that no longer trembled. And the galaxy will be a safer place, Zephyr concluded, standing and extending her hand in the human gesture of farewell. Sometimes peace requires the complete elimination of those who would destroy it. Today is one of those times. As Koren shook her hand, he realized that humans didn't just value peace and justice. They were willing to become something terrible and final to protect both. The small species from the unremarkable yellow star had appointed themselves the galaxy's immune system, and they intended to eliminate the cancer that threatened all life. Walking back through the station's corridors, clutching the charred remains of his world's flag, Koren felt something he hadn't experienced since learning of the genocide. Hope. Not just for his surviving people, but for the galaxy itself. Because somewhere in the cold darkness between stars, 12 billion monsters were about to learn what happened when humans decided that enough was enough. And across the galaxy, peaceful species would sleep more safely, knowing that someone was watching, someone was judging, and someone was willing to do what needed to be done. The age of casual genocide had ended the moment humans decided to respond proportionally. And proportional response, it turned out, meant extinction. But as Koren reached the station's main corridor, Zephyr's voice called out behind him. Mr. Metallic, there's one more thing you should know about human justice. He turned back to see her standing in the doorway of Conference Room 7, her expression more serious than it had been during their entire meeting. The Drakari won't be dying alone, she said quietly. We've identified 43 other species across the galaxy that actively practice systematic genocide as a form of expansion policy. Koren felt his tendrils curl with a mixture of anticipation and dread. What are you saying? I'm saying that the Drakari operation is just the beginning, Zephyr replied, walking back toward him with measured steps. Humanity has spent the last 6 months conducting a comprehensive galactic census of civilizations that view genocide as acceptable government policy. She pulled out a datapad that displayed a star map dotted with red markers. Each marker represented a different species, a different world, a different collection of sentient beings who had decided that murdering entire civilizations was an acceptable way to conduct interstellar relations. The Vorthak Dominion exterminated 17 species over the past century, she noted, highlighting one cluster of systems. The hegemony of steel has wiped out 9 civilizations in just the last decade. The Crystal Empire considers the elimination of inferior biology to be a religious obligation. The scope of galactic genocide was staggering. Koren had known that violent expansion occurred, but he had never realized how systematic and widespread it had become. So what happens to them? He asked, though he was beginning to suspect that human concepts of justice operated on scales that most species couldn't comprehend. They get to experience the same fate they've inflicted on others, Zephyr said with matter-of-fact certainty. Each one will face extinction through methods specifically designed to match their particular brand of cruelty. She expanded the star map to show human naval positions throughout the galaxy, small task forces positioned near every red marker, waiting with the patience of cosmic predators. The Crystal Empire will face biological weapons that target their unique physiology, she explained. The hegemony of steel will discover that their metal-based technology makes excellent conductors for electromagnetic warfare. The Vorthak will learn what happens when their own poison gas techniques are improved by human chemistry. Koren stared at the display, realizing that humanity had quietly positioned itself to eliminate dozens of genocidal civilizations simultaneously. This is galactic war on an unprecedented scale. No, Zephyr corrected. This is galactic pest control. War implies that the other side has a chance to win. She closed the datapad and looked directly into his large black eyes. Mr. Metallic, your people died because the galaxy allowed monsters to exist unchallenged. That ends today. When this operation concludes, every species in known space will understand that genocide carries absolute consequences. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just avenging the Centaurians. They were systematically eliminating every civilization that practiced extinction as policy, reshaping the galactic order through precise application of overwhelming force. How many innocent people will die in these operations? Koren asked. Fewer than would die if we allowed the genocidal species to continue existing, Zephyr replied with mathematical certainty. Our analysis indicates that these 44 civilizations would eliminate approximately 200 billion innocent beings over the next 50 years, if left unchecked. She paused, her expression becoming almost gentle. Sometimes, Mr. Metallic, the only way to save the innocent is to eliminate those who would murder them. Humanity learned this lesson through our own painful history. As they stood in the corridor of the galaxy's most depressing diplomatic station, Koren realized he was witnessing the beginning of a new cosmic age. An age where peaceful species could exist without fear of extinction, because someone was finally willing to eliminate the predators. Will you tell the other survivors about this? Zephyr asked. Koren clutched the charred flag fragment tighter, feeling its weight as both memorial and promise. Yes, they deserve to know that our deaths meant something. That justice exists, even when it comes from unexpected sources. Good, Zephyr said, extending her hand one final time. Because in about 72 hours, every peaceful civilization in the galaxy is going to wake up in a universe where genocide is no longer profitable. As Koren walked away, he carried with him not just the burned remnants of his world's flag, but the knowledge that his people's sacrifice had triggered something unprecedented in galactic history. The systematic elimination of evil itself. Behind him, Zephyr returned to Conference Room 7 to begin the next phase of humanity's grand design. Because extinction, it turned out, was contagious when applied with sufficient precision and righteous fury.